Hello and welcome to this very exciting Hustle Castle video, which will be on one of the newest sets out there, the Nameless King Set. Hustle Castle have kindly let me borrow this 6-piece set for 2 weeks to test it out, and then they'll be taking it back shortly after this video has been released. Within this video, I will give you my best overlook I can over this set, on what are the great features about it, but also what are the main negatives and why some people might not actually want it. Just to clarify about what Hustle Castle have actually done, they have given me a 6-piece Nameless King set with the maxed out attributes that you can get from making these items yourself. The only downside, which does actually make some sense, I'm not allowed to reforge any of these items for better event gear that I might have laying around, as they obviously need to take this back after I'm done testing. One thing to note, even though these stats on the items have come maxed out, which is obviously unlikely to what you'll be seeing if you make these items, I won't be reforging any of these items even temporarily for better event gear, so then this will make this test a little fairer, but because I can't reforge these items, the maxed out stats will actually help when I'm comparing to other fighters in these battle statistics. Just before that though, I do have diamond giveaways that I do weekly, so make sure that you go in the description and find my Glean link down below. That will take you to a page where all you need to do is enter your in-game ID and then you've entered. Otherwise there are more things you can do to increase your chances, and again I do these weekly. So what will this video include? Well, we're going to go for a variety of different battle scenarios, from PvPs against my girlfriend, arena battles, a little clan wars, and ending on some djembe fights. And then at the very end I'll give you my opinion on who this might be good for and if you should even go for it. So the other fighter we'll be comparing against is my Annihilator, and you might be wondering why is that? And that's because both of these fighters offer pure damage from their set pieces alone, and nothing about protection or sustain to make these sets different. Please pause the video here if you'd like to compare these different stats, as you might not have seen them before. Both use tank armor and armor soul, so damage is pretty similar in damage per second, with the only difference being the weapons and weapon soul. Obviously it wouldn't be a fair test if I leave all my runes on my Annihilator, as that gives him a massive advantage compared to the Nameless King set, who wouldn't have any. I'll also be taking off the artifact and gems to make the stats closer together as possible, so let's see how they both turned out and compare the stats on screen. So I've removed the artifact, the runes, the purple talent from my Annihilator, and some gems to make it more balanced. And looking at the stats, I've been able to make it pretty close to each other. Unfortunately, even with my legendary gems on my Annihilator, it's still lower in health by 14,000, so I've given them an extra 3,000 dodge on top of the Nameless King to make it as balanced as possible. There is only one downside, and that's the alliances. The alliances is forcing me to have one of these tanks into the alliance, and that allows them to have 5% more armor and magic armor, so I've selected the Annihilator considering I've given them less armor anyway. If you're enjoying this video so far, then make sure you get subscribed, in case I get the opportunity to do this again in the future with another brand new set. And now on to fighting. We're going to start with some PvPs against my girlfriend doing 2 team fights, and then a showdown on a 1v3 versus her tanks. Again, you might ask why 3 tanks and I don't do less fires like a 1v1, and that's because both tanks benefit from fighting 3 people at a time. The Nameless main ability will hit 3 enemies with lightning bolts that deal 300,000 damage over 5 seconds. After that, anyone that was hit by an electric javelin that can pass through all enemies will explode and deal another 120,000 damage. The Annihilator on the other hand will deal 15,000 damage every second to surrounding enemies. After dealing 200,000 damage, his next attack will deal another 75,000 damage. This will also send out shards that deal 80,000 damage each to 3 random enemies. So as you can see, both deal a large amount of damage, so let's see how they both stack up against each other in the coming fights. So we're starting off with the Nameless King in a 1v3. Generally for both fighters, these fights won't last long, but that's to be expected. The main thing we're looking for is the amount of damage they produce, since their sets are all damage based. So let's have a look at the first fight. He produced 1.5 million damage, and since we don't have anything else to compare against, let's just run the next fight and see what happens in this one. As a rule of thumb, as long as you can see the lightning appear from the Nameless King, that is generally where most of his damage will come from. With this fight, he lasted just a bit longer than the last one, so let's see if the extra few seconds may have made a big difference for his abilities to work. In this fight, he produced 2.6 million damage, which is far more than he did last time. But let's see what the Annihilator does to see if the Nameless King actually did well, or not so well if he's the last man standing. And to keep it the same, we're using the same enemies as the Nameless King did. And in this fight he lasted even longer than the Nameless King by a few seconds, and dealt 2.9 million damage. So far this is much more than the Nameless King, but this might have been his best case scenario, so let's see what the next fight brings. This time he lasted the same time as the Nameless King usually does, based on my last 2 runs, and he ends up getting 2.2 million damage. So what we're going to do now is do 2 team fights including both of these fighters, and then add up all of the damage combined over the last 4 fights to see what each fighter got. and then move on to doing 2 arena battles versus people that are either the same or stronger in power to see what these fighters can actually do. These next 2 fights will be a better comparison of what normal fights will look like, but even this first one went all the way until the timer finished, so I've sped it up a little just to reach the end quicker. In this one, the Annihilator produced 3.5 million damage and the Nameless King produced 6.8 million damage. This is a huge turnaround compared to what the 1v3s looked like. You could argue that the Nameless King was resurrected more times, but I wouldn't have expected nearly twice the amount of damage. Here's the next fight anyway to see if we can get the same numbers, or maybe the Nameless King got a little bit lucky with how many times they got resurrected. This time the battle was a lot shorter, so we can expect both fighters to have a lot less damage, but this won't affect their averages too much based on all 4 fights. The Annihilator dealt 1.6 million, whereas the Nameless King dealt 1.4 million. With everything added up over the last 4 fights, the Nameless King dealt 12,512,000 and the Annihilator dealt 10,350,000. So a few things to talk about. Yes, this was only over 4 fights, and yes, in one of them the Nameless King did get resurrected a lot more times than the Annihilator and stayed up for longer, but this definitely gives you some idea of what you can expect if you compare the Nameless King to the Annihilator. For anyone who's still not sure which one is better, or maybe you're a bit of a fanboy of the Annihilator, then not to worry. We're now moving on to 2 arena battles that are coming up, and these are going to simulate a more varied test as we're not facing the same sets over and over again. So right now I'm going to look for someone that's either my power or stronger, because I want to make sure it's a difficult fight, or at least somebody who should be strong as I am. I found this 20 million for our first fight, so let's see how we get on. The fight unfortunately doesn't last that long, but it's not a problem, we're just here to look at the stats. The Annihilator dealt 1.3 million damage, and the Nameless King dealt 2.6 million. As we do more and more fights, we can see the Nameless King has a slight advantage over the Annihilator, but as we only have a few more fights to look at, we can see if this balances out later or if this is how things are meant to be. Our next fight will be against a 19.8 million, another strong test, and unfortunately in this one we lost this fight. It doesn't help that we haven't got any runes on at the minute, but this is to make sure it is a fair test. The Annihilator dealt 1.2 million damage, and the Nameless King only dealt 429,000. This certainly shows that if the Nameless King doesn't have a lot of time to play with, he doesn't deal that much damage, and they rely heavily on their set stats to get the damage across, as long as they stay alive long enough. But in fairness, that is just kinda like with most sets. We're now going to look at one of these clan war fights, and finally end on 2 Djembe fights on level 14 and 15. And then tally up all the stats to see who came out on top, and then I'll finally have a little talk about what I think about the set and whether it's actually good for certain people. Unfortunately I forgot to record the clan war fights as I did this video over multiple days, so that does mean I can't show it. But I do remember the fighters basically got the same damage, but I won't be adding it into my final number as I can't show it and prove what they got. Let's just move on to the Djembe fights and finish off with me talking about the Nameless King. In the first Djembe, which was on round 14, the fight was pretty close and the Nameless King actually did die, but I am able to sort this out. So in this fight the Annihilator dealt 2.3 million damage and the Nameless King dealt 1.6 million. So because of the situation, I could have watched a video to bring them back, but I thought instead that I'll keep doing Djembes until I got to round 15 with both of them up, which didn't actually take me that long. Looking at the last fight, the enemy was very strong and I wasn't actually able to beat them, but that's not actually a bad thing. The Nameless King did get resurrected way more times than the Annihilator, so take these numbers how you like. The Annihilator did 5.4 million and the Nameless King did 6.6 million. So now to round up everything we have done into one big number and see what we have. The Nameless King over all 8 fights we've seen did 23,896,000 and the Annihilator dealt 20,824,000. With this we can see there is a difference between the 2 sets, with the Nameless King taking a slight advantage. These stats will vary more depending on what types of sets you face, but at least you can see based on the fights that I have done, you can actually get some benefit in swapping out the Annihilator for this new fighter. Here are some issues aside from the things we've just been talking about. To me this should be classed as a premium set, as you need to earn everything through the portal, earning very dark souls. Now this is quite specific because it's the very dark souls, not the basic ones. This isn't as difficult as the marquee, but if you aren't very strong in power, you might not be able to do this very easily until you earn other sets first, making earning the Nameless King set more difficult than the Annihilator, which only needs normal Dark Souls. You would also need good items, preferably event ones, to use on your Nameless King to make them tougher to kill. If you have runes, this will extend on how long they survive, because most runes on tank armor or amulets normally benefit on keeping them alive. This is a great example. If you find the Power of the Seat playmail up for grabs, try and do your best to obtain it. With the Rune of Tenacity on, it adds an ability to gain 35% of his max health when its health is critically low. This is especially good in keeping any of your tanks alive, and another thing to look out for would be the Rune of Anger. This can also be a great way of keeping your tanks alive. Having these in combination with the Nameless King will surely make them a great asset to your team. But should you even go for it? The simple answer is yes, the more complicated answer is it depends. But another answer would be to never pay for the 6p's version. Paying £45 to £99 for a 6p set never makes sense to me when you can just make it yourself over time. And even in the case if you wanted to buy it because you had the money, this set unfortunately isn't worth the price. If you already have a 4 to 8 man setup full of set pieces, then I would actually recommend using this new set over some of the original tanks for some really nice damage. It would be harder to decide if you had tanks like the Eclipse or the Executioner, as they bring different benefits to your squad, so that'll be up to you if it's worth it in your eyes. Let's say you're in a bit of a weird place with your squad and you have between 3 to 0 fighters with sets. This might not actually be the best move for you, because like I said before, to earn the Nameless King you will need to earn Dark Souls, and even though it might be possible to do the early levels, you won't be making as many souls as you like to get them effectively. So whether you're struggling in the portal or have only just started building into sets, then I would highly recommend going for the Annihilator instead. It provides a lot of damage, especially when you get to the 6p stage, and because of the buff they received a little while ago, with their on-death damage going from 125% max health to 200% max health, makes them an even better choice. I will say on a side note, I was originally disappointed with the Nameless King when they first gave it to me, because I was actually expecting a lot more. But the stats don't lie, and they are actually better than what I was using as a damage tank. If the developers were looking for my opinion on whether the sets need some adjustments, I will say this. The set itself should not require you to make perfect items or have runes or event items in place to make them great when it's classed, in my opinion, as a premium set. For something that's going to take a lot of time to get, should stand out right out of the box, or at least at the 6p stage. They already have some great damage, but because of their lack of survivability, it doesn't make them a desirable pick until you have the right things in place. The one thing I would add to the set piece to make them stronger but not overpowered should be when all enemies that were hit by the electric javelin explode and deal 120,000 damage, the fighter should also heal back for 10% of the damage done to all affected enemies. This would mean if it hit one person, the Nameless King would heal for 12,000 health, and if it hit 4 enemies, then he would heal for 48,000. It's a small adjustment, but I think this would make enough of an impact to keeping them alive for a few more seconds to deal their major abilities, as we have seen this make a big difference along the video. Anyways, thank you again to Hustle Castle for providing me this set to review, and a big thank you to all of you that have watched this video until the end. It'd be great to hear your comments on what you think about this set, and I'd love to hear the things that you think I could have done differently for a better review or comparison if I get the chance to review another set in the future. Make sure you leave your comments down below. And make sure you follow me on Facebook to keep up to date with every new video I do, and follow me on Twitter to keep up to date with every giveaway that comes out. And why not check out my most recent video on what changes I think Hustle Castle could make, and where I answer your comments as well.